was too a tremendous risk that one had to do because the Jews were not allowed to travel. So we had to take off our armbands, and we had to communicate with some Polish people from Hell who took it upon themselves to get us, and we went back to Helm at night in a train, pretending that we are not Jewish. We weren't caught, so we were lucky. If we would have been caught, we would have been shot, you see. Because that was one of the things. When we came back to Helm, things were pretty much the same way. My mother tried to do what most of the Jewish women were doing, you know, trying to sell from those who had and made a livelihood out of the things, you know, the silver or the gold or whatever it is that they had to the Poles. And we knew a lot. I was raised in a non-Jewish community. That probably is another part of it too. It saved my life. Ultimately, it saved my life because I could pose as a Catholic. Church and confession and all kinds of stuff like that included, because I was raised in a completely non-Jewish community. And I went to work for the Jewish Gemeinde as an employee without pay. You see, when the Germans were handing out rations, they had to be given out to the people, and that's when we tried to organize the Jewish population that they should not be cheated out of whatever little that the Germans were giving them. So what we organized at that time is going down to some of the people from the lower economy, those that had absolutely nothing, that didn't have things to sell, and that they depended solely on the bread, whatever it is that they were giving, and all the rations. We arranged, some of them gave us places in the neighborhood. We divided it into, not we, the Germans divided it into certain, districts, let's say, let's put district, I don't remember how they called it. And we used to go to the homes of certain people where there was a cluster of full people, and in their homes we gave out the rations. And this is the first time when I was faced with having to talk Yiddish, something that I never talked at home. But I knew it because my grandmother lived at home and my parents spoke Yiddish, and the people, that's how he made me feel Jewish. It was the first time I felt it. But in addition to that, we had to go to work too. I mean, I wasn't an official of the Gemeinde. This was a voluntary kind of a job that I did afterwards. And when he needed people to go dig ditches or to do other things, I did that too. Sometimes the Gemeinde was able to give us a sort of excuse that we shouldn't be able to go. Well, this I will fix back. The Jews were spread out all over in various sections. And he started, you see, when I came back, I had a grandmother there, my mother's mother, my father's mother. My father's mother had a bakery. My father's sister was there. You see, my father comes from a long line of bakery. And interestingly enough, it was the woman who was conducting the bakery, because my father's father was a Talmud. He was studying in shul. He never had anything to do. It was the matriarch that she had the children. She has 9 children, and the children were helping her. And the husband was learning, was studying. I never knew him. It was easier to come back because bread we had, because your grandma, the relatives supported us. We moved in with my father's sister, And then they began talking about condensing the ghetto, the Jews into one, it was I think about a year later, into one area where they gave us up to this street and up to this street. And of course they chose the most dilapidated, the oldest, and the tightest area. We had a little conflict at that time too, because again, we could not find quarters. When my father was in Helm, he was a prominent person. He belonged to many to the guild of the bakers. He represented them in the government and so on. But when we came back, we could not find anything. And my mother tried with some old friends. We were finally permitted to have a bed in it was a 3-room apartment where five families were living. But my mother and I were considered a family because we were only 2. And there it was the same thing. We used to go out and go to work and come back. At 7 o'clock we had to be back at home. In summertime, it was pretty light at 7 o'clock. Now, while we were there in the same building where I lived, in the same house downstairs, there was a guy that people were saying that he was a collaborator. I never knew for sure whether he was or not. But he was the one who always gave us the warning. He said that he worked in the German, whatever it is, I don't know where he was, but he had correct information. He would always come home. He wouldn't tell us, but when we would see that his mother and his sister and his brother-in-law at 5 o'clock went out with a little package and were going out of the ghetto, we knew that something is going to happen. So that's when we hid. We hid in the attic, we hid in the cellars, we hid wherever we could. And we had lots, as I told you, we had lots of friends. So my mother would go to one friend and I would go to another family. And the minute it was over, the minute it blew over, we could come back and do whatever, continue doing whatever we were doing. Those things were happening, every 6 months. First they started with the little children, then they started with the old people, children under 14, and then it was women over 65. Now my grandmother was 72, and we were very much concerned about it when they came to that. But she died the day before. She was very sick, and she died. She didn't have to go any place there. Now, then in November, or in fall, sometimes in the fall of 42, this guy told already everyone in that. It was a little community. It was like a couple of houses clustered together with lots of people living there. And the rumor came out, and I don't know, his family lived together with a girlfriend of mine. And when he told his family, she knew, and she told me, and I told my mother. You see, and it was, and I told my mother, and when the people we lived with saw that we are going, they all went. Then we found out that it's going to be Judenrein, that there will be no return. So my mother went to, well, we didn't believe it. I'll tell you the truth, that whenever they told us these things, nobody really believed that this is going to happen. But we cleared out. We felt, well, after that we will all be able to come back. So I went to a lady who all the time was trying to tell me that she has a sister in Krakow, and if I would like to go to Krakow, she would take me because I didn't look Jewish. I spoke a perfect, flawless Polish that nobody would perceive that I have an accent or anything like that. And she said that sister would employ me and I will be with her and I could survive the war there. So my first thought was to go to this lady, to her house. When I came there, she was in Krakow. You see, she was doing what they called Schaber. She was going to Krakow and bringing the produce from whatever, there were more peasants, there were more food. She was bringing it there, and she was bringing clothing back from Krakow from her sister. You see, when I came, this was my misfortune. When I came to her house, she wasn't there, and her husband and her daughter wouldn't take the chance. So they let me stay overnight. And the following morning they came in and they said that there are all sorts of placards in the city saying that anybody who holds a Jew, who harbors a Jew, will get killed. And he says, you are nobody to me, and I have a daughter, and I don't want to be killed for you. I like you, and whenever it was for one night, it was fine. But I don't want to keep you. So I pleaded with them they should let me stay until dusk, perhaps, hoping that maybe she will come back, and also stalling for time. Now, they left me in the house, but they locked the door from outside. The daughter and the husband went out, and they locked the door. They put this locker that we use on lockers, so it was obvious that the door was locked and nobody was there. I had to be perfectly quiet, nobody should know. And through the drawn curtains, I saw how some of the Jews were herded into to stations or wherever. They used to take them to either to Treblinki or someplace else around Hell, to Sobibor. Sobibor and Treblinki were the two places where, we saw them while we were in the ghetto and we were working. We used to see the transports going there. So eventually the girl came back, the daughter came back, and she swore that she saw my mother killed in the middle of the street resisting arrest or running away. A German shot her down, and she described how she looked, what she wore, which was really... And at that, with this knowledge, and with not being able to stay in this house anymore, I had left at about 5 o'clock. I got dressed, and I left. And I really didn't know where the hell I was going. Now, I remember from way back when I was a little girl, there was a railroad running through the town, through the outskirts of the town. And anybody who would hear they jump from the 20th, from a window. We didn't have that tall window, so people used to go and throw themselves under the train when the train was going by. And that was my plan. My mother was killed. I had no place to go. I had no money. And no money to talk of. I mean, I had maybe for a week or for two, but I didn't have anything much to talk of. And that was my decision. I decided to go on the railroad track and to kill myself. And I went out of the city so that nobody should be able to stop me. And if you know how railroad tracks are made, if you walk, you put your hand on, you can feel when the train is coming from the back. When I felt that the train was coming, I closed my eyes, I put myself face down, and I lay down on the tracks. And I was laying there and waiting for the train to come. I could hear. Of course, I misjudged the distance. The train must have been in the next town. And suddenly somebody came over to me with one of those lamps that they are carrying, the hand lamps, and it was a conductor. He was checking the trains because they sabotaged the train a day before. So he was trying to see whether there is nothing on the train. He saw something lying there. So he came to clean the train because another bunch was coming or whatever it is. So he took me off the track. He looked at me and he said, you're really very stupid because you don't look Jewish. And why do you have to kill yourself? And you are so young. And you're so this. Go tell him. And there are lots of Jews, he says, hiding in the forest, a couple of miles farther down. Well, if there are some other Jews there, I figured, well, as long as I'm not alone, I couldn't tolerate being alone at that time. And as I was walking, it became very, very dark, and I got very frightened. So I first got into a haystack, and then I got into a barn, and then I couldn't find the Jews in the forest, but I found the forester. And he took my ring, and he took my watch, and he wanted to report me to the Germans that I was there. And I heard it was outside of Helm. I heard the shooting, and I heard the exploding. They used to go down when they thought that Jews are hidden in a cellar. They would throw a grenade down there because they were afraid to go down themselves. And I guess there was no need for the Germans to go. That's how they cleared out. And all this I heard the whole night that I was there. And eventually it was the second day, and I became hungry, and I didn't want to stay there by myself. So in the evening I got brave, and I went back to town. And I went back looking for this lady, whether she came back, but she wasn't back. They threw me out from that place, and I went back. We used to have the bakery that we owned, and we owned the house and so on. So I went to the people who bought the bakery from us. They were very frightened when I came, but they gave me bread, and they fed me, and they told me that my mother was there, that she came and she took a bath, and she changed, and they told me where she went. She went to other people. So that night I didn't go back to the farm where I was hiding out, but I went back. I tried to go back to the place where my mother was. I was apprehended by a guy who went to school with me, and he said to me that he had to report me too. Now I talked him out of it on the ground that he was a Boy Scout. I was very idealistic. I quoted him poetry, and I said to him, so he says he would be going against his sworn conscience that he was working for the Germans, and he swore that he will be this and that. Oh, much. Did you make a hole? He swore loyalty to them. So I tried to give him something, we were brought up very patriotic, and with all the poetry, with all the Poles, as much as they are a very patriotic nation, the Poles. And I kind of appealed, I made an agreement with him that he had to bring me to a firehouse. That was the detention house for all the Jews that were collected afterwards. So I said to him, the guy who was marching in front of the firehouse, how about bringing me next to him when he is turning his back? So you will do your duty, and I will do whatever I will do. And he agreed to that. So when the guy turned his back, I went in the different direction, and I went back to my safety, to the barn. It was an abandoned barn that I went back to. The following day, I went to the other place where I thought my mother was, but she wasn't there anymore. But I left a description of the barn where I was. Now, I wouldn't go into details. About a week later, I was discovered in this barn by the people who noticed me coming and going in the evening. And I was buried into a great deal of hay. And they didn't throw me out. They brought me some coffee, and they brought me some food, and they said, please, get off our property. So I again tried to convince them, this is so far from your home. You can always say that you didn't know. And they left me alone. And that same night, I had heard footsteps. And I thought that they are coming to arrest me, but of all people, it was my mother. She heard someplace else that I am alive in a barn around, we know where, around the brewery, and she said that her mother's instinct brought her across from the different part of the city, wherever she was, to me. Now, my mother was shot. She had her eye was all black and blue, because she was hiding in some place where they were shooting too. She was all bloodied, her head was bloody, but she kind of was strong because she heard it. When she heard that I was alive, somebody saw her like that, and she was also figuring, that's the end. So she came to me. And we were lying, then we were both thrown out of that barn because the guy saw that the two of us, he didn't want a congregation. So we went someplace else and we hid on the very top, and children were playing. Every 5 minutes we were thinking that somebody will discover us. And at that point we started to make a plan. We couldn't stay there too long. And my mother and I decided that we have to separate. She couldn't go where I would go, but she felt like everybody else felt, that I should get dressed and I should get on the train and I should go. I should try to save myself. I should go fight my way through the war, or fight your way through it. She had some money, so we split it. And I had a fur coat with some other Poles. For the Germans, you had to give up all the leather and all the silver and all, but they kept it for me. So one night, I went over there, and I asked them to give me back the fur coat. And while I was asking, they told me they saw yesterday somebody was shot, and today somebody was this and that. But I took the coat. I had bleached hair. It was blonde. My nose is straight. For the Germans, if you didn't have a crooked nose and curly hair, and you were neat, then you weren't Jewish. I got the coat, and I get dressed, and I didn't want to buy the ticket from our station. So I marched to the next station from the place where I was, along the railroad tracks, and as I came there, I saw a number of Jewish people that were pretending to be non-Jewish, buying tickets. I bought a ticket also for the night. And I traveled in the train, not knowing where the hell I was going. I really didn't know where to go. But I had an idea that if I go to a resort, maybe I can find, I had the gymnasium already behind my belt, and I thought that I could find a tutorial job to do something as a Pole. By the time I arrived in Krakow, I was exhausted because they were inspecting papers. I had no papers. I had absolutely nothing to show if they would ask me. But I had chutzpah. That's all I had. And I had the blonde hair and the fur coat, and I figured that they will not look. Oh, I also went to the other Poles to get me something else, some other shoes. I needed big shoes because it started to snow, and I left on high heels, and my feet were swollen, so I needed a shoe that was maybe 3 sizes larger than I was. I went to other people. I got a blanket. I got some other things. I had a change of underwear with me because that's the way you used to walk out from when you were in the ghetto. When you walked out for the night, you never knew you'd come back. So I had a bathrobe and underwear and some other things in my briefcase. That's what I had. And I went to these people and asked them for a blanket because I was lying, and they gave me a blanket. So I had a blanket over my hand, and I was traveling in the train like a big lady, whatever it is. I was scared stiff. And they spot checked in the train. And I made believe I slept, and they came in with the light into my face. And I was blonde, and I was nicely dressed. Apparently I didn't look the way they want. They let me go. They never asked me to show them any papers or anything. But when I arrived to Krakow, it was already, I think, after 7. And you were not allowed to leave the station after 7 into the street or whatever it was. I remained in the station. And people, hundreds of people were in the central station there, lying on the floor, all those smugglers who were going back and forth. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, what am I going to do with myself? I really didn't know. I didn't have any papers. And that's when I decided to go to Zakopane. That's a ski resort in Poland. And a little lady was sitting next to me, and she was asking me where I was going. And I was almost sure that she recognized. You see, the Germans wouldn't recognize us, but the Poles did. And lots of us went down the drain because the Poles told on us. I could recognize any Jew in the street who didn't wear anything, no matter how good he looked, because there was a certain sadness in the eyes that gave you away.
They say a Jew always recognizes another one.
Well, not necessarily. Here you wouldn't. In the United States you wouldn't. The Italians look very much like Jews. You wouldn't know really. But during the war we had such this haunted look, this look of a haunted animal, and you could see it. You see, I had it too apparently, but well, I'll get to that later. Anyhow, this lady was sitting next to me and she asked me, where are you traveling? And of course I made a big story. It was easy to fantasize at that time. I made up a big story about that I'm going to Zakopane, that I'm a Polish patriot, and that I'm escaping prosecution from my town because they are after, which they were. The Germans, as soon as they got through with the Jews, they started with the Polish patriot. Anybody who will stimulate dissent or who will do any of the things that was obstructing whatever it is that they wanted to do, or that was educational for the people. So the woman kind of accepted it, and she says, do you have a place in Zakopane? So I said, no, I don't, but I have money. I had. You shouldn't know from it what I had. But I said, oh, I have money, and I suppose that I'll be able to sleep over. I found a hotel for myself. So she says, I would advise you not to go to the big hotels. They have lots of homes that people are renting. Lots of them lost lots of money and the thing, and that's for their subsistence. I would advise you to go to a place like that. So I said, how do I find out? To me, it was better. So she says, well, in the railroad station, they will have little things, and you will find out. And she says, how long are you going to stay there? I said, I really don't know how long I'm going to stay. I may come back after a couple of weeks after I rest. I told her my nerves are shattered from all the persecution that I have suffered. She looked to me like a woman who used to be a maid for a Jewish family, because there was many expressions that she used that made me think that. And of course I went to Zakopane, and the first house I came to, the man asked me to register for papers, and there I was. I had absolutely nothing. I mean, I was very naive. I didn't know about legalities and all kinds of stuff. And he says, what's your name? And out of fright, I got scared. I had a very good friend that I was raised together with, was Polish. I forgot her name. I forgot her name, I forgot her birthday, I forgot everything. He was a nice guy, and he said, something is not really, there is something here that doesn't jive for me, and I'm not going, probably somebody else maybe would have reported you. But I am not going to. I would advise you to be more careful with whatever you do. And I walked out, and I really didn't know. I was like in a dream. I didn't know where I was walking. And as I was walking down the street, the first person I saw was a guy, an anti-Semite from my small town, who I knew the minute he sees me, he was going to the same school that I was going. He's going to report me. So I turned on my heel, and I went right back to the station, to the railroad station, because I didn't know whether he was here just to be there. I kind of was superstitious already, and I thought maybe he'll report. I went back to the station, and I decided to go back to Krakow, to that lady to whom I spoke. She says, when you come back to Krakow, come to visit me. So I decided I already have somebody in Krakow. I established a home where I could go into. Now I came back to Krakow, again the following morning, but again till 6 o'clock in the morning you couldn't get out from the station, from the railroad station. So I was thinking, what am I going to do? I figured even if I go to this lady, she will also want to have some paper to notify that I live there. You have to have something. So I was sitting, it was already, I don't know, it was about 3 o'clock, and the time was going fast, and I knew at 6 o'clock they empty out the place. I couldn't stay there. So what I did really is at that time I went into a bathroom in the station, and I was lousy. I was full of lies, everything that I had, because that was about 2 weeks that I was going around it was cold, and I was wearing a sweater. And I was frightened. I was very frightened. What do you do with that? So I tried. I took a shower there. You could do it in the station. I guess you have it in Grand Central Station here too, that you can take a shower.
Never tried.
Yeah, but this is what I tried to find out. And I went in and I took a shower and I changed and I threw away all the underwear that I was wearing. But a sweater I had to have and a coat I had to have. So I cleaned it as best as I could. And 6 o'clock was approaching, and I didn't know what I'm going to do without the papers. And finally, I sat down. I got up from the floor. They have the benches and the thing, which were, as it got closer to 6, people were moving. Those that brought material or whatever it is to sell were moving out to the door so they could get out first. So a seat was vacated on a bench, and I was sitting there and thinking, what am I going to do? And suddenly I got so depressed, and I started crying. But I started crying so hysterically that the lady on the side next to me says, what happened to you? Anybody did something to you? And this gave me an idea. And I said, yes, somebody stole my pocketbook. And I had my documents in my pocketbook. So right away I had a cop and a Gestapo man, and a lot of people around, and 15 witnesses who saw somebody sitting next to me, and they could swear she looked Jewish, and she must have needed the papers that I had, and she took them from me. Good, so I already had something, but by that time I already was prepared for a name. So the man says to me, you got to go to the Gestapo and tell them the story. I had nothing to lose. Absolutely nothing. So I went to the Gestapo. It was like a unit of the Gestapo in a Polish police precinct. And Poles were worse, as I told you, than the Germans, because they were shrewder. You know, you could put something over on some of the Germans. Individually, I suppose. And I told him the story. And he says, what's your name? And I gave him the name. I gave him the name of the girl in whose house I was hiding with this woman who was in Krakow who wanted to get me to the sister. Gave him the name of the girl. And he says to me, are you sure you're not lying to me? That was a Pole who was interrogating. Of course I'm sure. My eyes were red and I was upset, and the upset was logical, you know. It was logical for them, but my upset, I was crying for my Eigenetzaurus, not for the things. The man typed out a piece of paper, which gave me a name and an address and a birth date and a place of departure from where I come. And it said that my document was stolen, and it had the German swastika stamp on it. But I didn't get it right away. He says, you're going to get it when you come here 3 days later. We are going to check in hell about you. So I figured to myself, there is a girl like that, and this is her birthday, and she lives there. I'm sure they're not going to go. They are so busy with all kinds of cockeyed business that they had, that they are not going to call her down to City Hall to testify that she is here or she is there. It was a real person that I gave, and that's all that they have to find out. And in the back of my mind, I figured that they're not going to check for little me. They're going to just test me out if I will have the nerve to come back for them. And with that, after that whole dilemma, I went into a restaurant and I had myself a real meal. And my heart was pounding because there were Germans sitting all over the place. And then I went to this lady who I met in the train on the way to Zakopane. The address that she gave me, I soon discovered that she was a janitor's wife, living in a sub-basement in one room with the husband who was a drunkard, and she was going around buying and selling, going to countryside, to little villages, picking up produce and selling, and buying off and selling stuff from what they robbed from the Jews, I suppose. Dresses and coats and whatever. So when I came into her, she was very glad. What happened to you? So I told her that all the Germans are on vacation. I couldn't find, you were right. You told me I wouldn't find a room. I really couldn't find a room. And I told her the story. Imagine what happened to me before she had a chance to ask me. Imagine what happened to me on the station in Krakow. So she cried with me, and she was shaking her head, and she said, well, it's really too bad that it happened to you. She says, but if you really want to stay here, I have no money for food. Now, I had a couple of crisp 100 zloty bills. That's what I got from my mother. And I said to her, and I pretended that I am very rich, that I have lots of money, there's much more where it came. Took out a crisp $100 zloty bill, and I says, here, go out and buy whatever is necessary. But while you go shopping, do me a favor, put up a pot of hot water so that I could take a bath and a shower. I traveled and so on. Now, with that, I kind of burned everything that I had. I put all my clothing into this, and I put it out to dry, and I went and I lay down to sleep. And I guess I slept 24 hours without a stop. First time in my bed, in a bed that she gave me. And the $100 bill kept her, but then she said, the neighbors are suspicious of you. And I don't really know whether the story about the paper and is true. So she says, it is already, you slept 24 hours, and tomorrow you better go and get that paper, or else you cannot stay here, because everybody is asking me, why are you sleeping 24 hours? I mean, it's a lot of sleeping and blah, blah, blah. My feet were swollen. They had to get off a little bit. And the guy came. She gave him money to go to drink, so he walked out, so we were alone in the house. And I went to the police precinct for the paper. And he gave it to me. And he says, to tell you the truth, I didn't believe that you're telling us the truth. I didn't believe you come back here, because all kinds of people come and tell us all kinds of cock and bull stories, but they never come back when they told them to come back in a couple of days. So I had a piece of ammunition. This was the ammunition that I had until I was arrested eventually. Now, on this paper, on the very, very bottom, it said in very small print, this is not valid as a document. This is to be used as a substitute until the old papers could be duplicated. But who cares? It was written in such tiny, tiny little print, I didn't care. So after a while, I couldn't stay with this lady, because she had to go to do some shabber. That's what they call it, to go on shabber. She had to go and to make some money. So she again told me that in the station, so the main station in Krakow became my home, because they closed it at 7, and it was shelter. You couldn't go out, and everybody was the same kind of suspect. So that time I inquired whether anybody knows any place where some families would want to rent a room. So one red cap got to talk to me. He says, I don't tell anybody these things, but I know a couple of places that they rent. He says, not rooms, beds. So I said, I don't care, I have to be here a couple of days only. I had to play a game, and I'll take a bed. So he went with me. He says he wants a certain amount of money that I should give him if I get the place. I said, fine. So I went with him, and we went to a couple of places. They took one look at me with the big shoes and whatever. I had a cockeyed outfit. The fur coat was nice and stylish, but I wore a hat that belonged to somebody else. I wasn't put together well. They didn't have any. Some didn't even let us in. But he brought me to one place, and there were children there. And the kids started, there were two kids, and there was a grandma and a young lady, and she said, for how long? She says, we happen to have a bed somebody left, and you can be, it costs 10, I will use the word dollars because it was zloty, but I get mixed up. It was 10 zloty per night to sleep there. And I said, fine, and I'll be back. She says, when are you going to be back? I said, I'll be back at about 6 o'clock. I go for my things, my little briefcase that I had there. And I went back to that other lady, and I told her that I found a room, and I told her where it is. And she said, wait for me, I'm going to the train, and we'll go together. It was around the station, and we'll go together. Well, by the time she got ready, and by the time we caught the tram, I came to these people, they already rented the bed, because it was already 6:30, and 7 o'clock you couldn't walk in the street. So I don't remember whether it was 7 or it was 8, I don't remember, but it was like a half an hour before nobody could be in the street. I must have looked terribly, terribly dejected. So the woman said to me, you know, somebody is leaving tomorrow. Do you have where to stay for tonight? I said, no, because this lady left. Her husband was drunk and I wouldn't go there. And everybody was suspicious of me there. So I said, no, I don't have where to go. Honestly, I don't. So she said to me, so the little boy started jumping up and down, let her stay, where's she going to go? They gave me his crib to sleep for the night. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, the grandmother was knocking at the crib's side, and the same story, I have to go shopping. Do you happen to have any money? So I took out 10, no, it was 20 zloty. So she says, but I don't want, you slept in the crib, so I'll charge you only 10. And then she said, tomorrow you'll sleep in another bed, somebody else is moving. And that's how I remained in this place for about a month or so. The children took to me. And it was around Christmas, and the woman needed somebody. This was a home that before the war they probably had a maid or whatever. Though I was not officially a maid, I became like a governess to the children. I used to take them for walks, and I used to take them to church, and I used to say the prayers with them. This is where I mean that my being raised in a Polish as opposed to a Jewish neighborhood saved me in this respect. I said the prayers with them at night, and I sang songs with them, and I helped them prepare the main Christmas meal, and I knew what was all about. But when I registered with them, they also had, it was approved. They are renting the beds or the rooms or whatever, was approved by the police, and I had to register. And when I registered, they said to me, you better start the ball rolling for a different birth certificate or whatever. I knew where the girl was born, and I rode away to the parish for a birth certificate. 3 weeks later, I get a card back which says, no one under such name has been ever registered in our parish. And that threw me. I didn't really know why was that. Well, I went, I went to the post office, and I called help to this lady, and I tried, and of course, my luck, she wasn't there. She was back in Krakow. So I got the telephone number and address of the sister, and I went to her, and I told her the whole story, because I had to confide in somebody. So she said that though the girl goes under the name of the woman's husband, she is illegitimate, and she carries her mother's name officially. So if I really want to have her birth certificate, to write for her birth certificate, I have to write for it on her mother's name, and not on her mother's married name. So I mean, as long as I knew what I was doing, I quickly rode away to the parish again. But what do you do with two different names? How don't you know your own name? So I again tried to make up some sort of a story that I suffered all my life out of the illegitimacy, and I'm stupid and I didn't know, and I made myself very dumb. And I figured that now that I lost the documents, I will be able to get my start from a clean slate, and I will be able to be called Maria Dvigai. That's what was my name. Maria Dvigai, and I'll start completely new and nobody will know. So all the people were sitting and were shaking their head, how stupid can you be, and this is with a gymnasium, and how can you be like that? Go tell them a story. In meantime, I heard from my mother. My mother, when they cleaned out the town, they left a number of Jews to be like the street cleaners and to clean out the bombs and clean out. So they left a little commando, and one of my friends who went to school with me was in charge of it, and my mother was incorporated into that little group. So what she did is that when Mrs. Dvigai came back to see her sister the following time, she brought me a package with clothing. So for these people who began to suspect that whatever I am doing, that there is something fishy about me, the real thing, oh no, it wasn't like that, I just forgot. When Mrs. Dvigai came, she came looking for me. I wrote them a letter. And I was with the children someplace in church or for whatever it is. So when this woman came and left the package, that's how the package came to where I is. I became real. Somebody came to ask for me under the assumed name. They asked for Maria Dvigai. So then they became a little bit more human, but they still suspected that there was something wrong. And of course I disappeared for hours on end into the town, that I have business. I was a patriot. I had to go to meet other patriots, I couldn't completely dismiss the things that I was. And any time I saw Germans, I used to walk straight in between them. They walked in twos. I always managed to get right in between them because I didn't want them to think that I'm afraid. So I did it. I overreacted in another way. I met some people from Hayatt that I saw. And when they saw me, they crossed the street. They didn't, Jewish people, Jewish women. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to get involved, and I didn't blame them. I didn't want to get involved with them either. And finally, while I was in the city, what I was doing is I was putting myself on queues. They had queues for some skimmed milk someplace. All of a sudden a queue formed, or for cheese, or for whatever it is that they had over. And I would get on the queue, and I would get it, and I would bring it home, for the kids. And I would eat soup in a place like the Salvation Army, and that was my supper. When I came home and the kids started liking me, the little one, he decided he doesn't want to eat unless I eat with him. And that's how I started becoming part of the family, and he was a very bad eater. You had to tell him stories, you had to sing him songs, and eventually I became part of this family with feeding the children and washing the floors and getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning for the milk, not on queues, but for the regular to pick up their rations, and doing all kinds of things that I had to do like a maid, but they didn't treat me as a maid. I did it voluntarily. And when they had somebody who brought in an extra $20 for a bed, up I went to the crib, you see. So I made them, and one day I went out and my money, but I was still paying $10, and my money was coming to an end, and I figured that's the end of me. But that day they decided, okay, I don't have to pay him because I do so many things for them, I don't have to pay him. But some neighbors began making remarks that here they are having an unusually good deal from someone, and they began suspecting, what kind of a woman is it in a fur coat and this and that. They didn't like it. So she she had some friends, this lady had some friends, the grandmother had some friends in the police precinct, and they told her, they warned her that she should do something about me because they are going to do something. The neighbors are complaining too much because all the neighbors in the whole building were doing the same thing. So that's when I decided to look for a job. Bought the paper, and I looked for a job for a maid, and I went right to the Lion's Mouth because I felt that's where I would be the safest. And a Gestapo person, I didn't know really, it was a German family that advertised for a maid. So I got dressed and I went. They lived in a new section of Krakow, and I went in there. I called up for an appointment, and the lady said she's going to see me. Now, this lady, you see, the reason it worked out the way it worked out with them is because she was half French. Her name was Charlotte Ziretsky. And the name Ziretsky didn't kind of made me, maybe they are not really German, because Ziretsky is a partly Polish name. And she was a charming young person, a little bit older than I was, a newly-wed person. But when I come in to see her, I saw on the hanger on the side a uniform, a Gestapo uniform hanging, and my heart dropped, but I had no way of backing out. One thing I never did, once I backed out, that's how I got arrested. I went, I continued, and she spoke to me, and she asked me, and she took me to the window, and she told me, you see that courtyard in the back, our neighbor next door, he's a major in the this and in the that, and she had a mate, and they found out she was Jewish, and they shot her down. You see the blood downstairs? Last week, that's what they did. They shot her. Okay. So I says, I'm not Jewish. I mean, I had to stick to something. I'm not Jewish. Now that I already knew that I have a piece of paper. So she says, well, why can't you find a job in an office? You speak a very good German, and you look intelligent. They are short of office workers. Why can't you work in an office? So I said to her that in an office, they don't pay you. I had this I came prepared a little bit. I said, they don't pay so well. And by the time I get some living quarters and food, I wouldn't be able to get a pair of shoes for myself. So she was fascinated with my coat. And she said, well, how come? How are you going to reconcile the business of being a maid and wearing a Persian lampo or whatever it is that I had? I don't remember what I had. Yeah, it was a Persian. And wear a Persian coat. How does it look? So I says, I'll tell you the truth, that if I would get a plain cloth coat, I would much rather dispose of that one. Up she went, opened up a closet. It was as big as the whole wall. She must have had about 100 coats. She says, if you give me the coat, your Persian coat, I'll give you a cloth coat. Anyone you want, anyone from here you want. And it probably will fit because we were the same size. So I said to her, but I'll make another stipulation. If you give me the job, I give you the coat, and I'll take your coat. And she said, you got the job from me, but Werner was the name of the husband. I think it was Werner Ziretsky. But you got to speak to Werner. And he is working today, and he has a meeting. He was a sports editor of the Krakow Times, or sports supervising editor of the Krakow. He had something to do with the newspaper. And I said, okay, I'll be here first thing in the morning. And I came in the first thing in the morning, and I gave one look at him with all these, all the paraphernalia that he was wearing, and he spoke to me, and he says, well, I don't understand why my wife wants you, and we won't be able to keep you because she's going to Köln. She was from or they were from Köln, or whatever it is. She's going back to Köln, and I'm going to be here alone, and I really don't think that you could stay. So I said, look, a couple of days, I can sleep there as long as I can work here. So he says, I don't know, my wife is, whatever she got in her, whatever bugs her, I don't understand why she wants you, but if it's all right with her, it's all right with me. And he says, let me see the piece. She told me the story. He says, let me see the paper. I show him the paper. Of course, he knew how to read Polish. And he read that little piece on the bottom, that it is not a document. So he says, did you see that? I said, yes, I am trying to get. So he says, it's already a month or 2 months since you got it. How long does it take to get the... I said, I don't know, mail got lost. I told him a whole story. I was quick on stories. I told him a whole story. He says, I don't think it is right. There is something fishy. Now, I don't know how long these people were married, but obviously they weren't married too long, because somehow he did it. He had, it seemed to me like he did it against his better judgment. But since Charlotte wanted it, he will kind of let her have her way, because he certainly wasn't concerned about me. So if I turn out to be a Jew, so they'll shoot me, and that's that. So what does he care? Now, then she went to Köln for a visit, and the place with the people where I was, with the children where I used to sleep, became very hot. The neighbors were trying terribly, and the woman was warned, the grandmother, that they better get rid of me or they will get into trouble, because they were also, in addition to having people sleep there, they were also doing all kinds of illegal business, like when they had somebody from a village come in, they would accept eggs and butter and all these things. I wasn't aware of it too much. I didn't want to know. But they were doing something that was not fully legit. I don't think renting beds was fully legit. They supposedly were renting rooms. But what they were actually doing is having different people sleep in different beds. So everybody had something on somebody else, and they told me that you better discuss it with Mr. Zaretsky, because the place here is swarming and things are going to happen, and if we don't want to get into trouble. There was no question for them that it is me. I mean, that they suspected, but I was a convenience for them, I suppose, in some way. And the kids were very attached to me. The little boy was 5 and the girl was, I think, 6. And the only reason that they had that much compassion is that the children's father was in Auschwitz. The children's father was a patriot, was a lieutenant in the Polish army who was one of the first to be deported. So they kind of had a little bit more of the openness. Urbanchik is their name if you need it. I correspond with them yet. So they wanted no trouble for themselves. They wanted no trouble for me. And they said, discuss it with him. And I told him that it's kind of difficult. He's all alone. And he was carrying on by himself. He was having parties. And I used to come the next day in the morning, and the house was all kinds, finding all kinds of things, girls and other things. But, you know, it wasn't my business. One day I sat down with him, and I told him that I would like to, to move in. And he says, look, you cannot move in while I am alone. And my wife will come. They didn't have a maid's room, but they had a place for a bed where you could put a curtain over. And when she came back and I told her the story, she said that it's okay with her that I should stay in. She couldn't understand. She didn't understand how it works, that they are friends. I didn't tell her that I used to do some work for them too. When I got through cleaning by her and doing everything there, I first went there and I cleaned and I washed and I scrubbed and I do all the kinds of things that the housework that they needed. Of course, they didn't expect and they didn't want. But I needed to be there, so I did it on my own. And they were very, strangely enough, they were very nice to me, these people. She was telling me that she had Russian and Ukrainian and all kinds of other girls before, but they used to steal and they used to be filthy dirty. I didn't have any place to go. I used to sit in the evenings and read books, and I was